They laughed at the poor father the moment he entered the courtroom. The worn-out blazer hanging loose on his thin frame, patches on the elbows that had been sewn on one too many times. His shoes, polished but cracked with age, squeaked against the marble floor as he made his way down the center aisle. Someone in the back row snickered. Another whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's him? The janitor who thinks he can take on the richest man in town?" The courtroom, packed with curious onlookers and reporters, fell into a hush as Daniel Matthews clutched his faded leather portfolio tighter to his chest, knuckles white with tension. The judge looked down from her bench, eyes narrowing slightly at Daniel's appearance. The court clerk didn't bother hiding his smirk as he announced the case number. Across the aisle, a team of 4 attorneys in immaculate suits arranged their documents with practiced precision, occasionally glancing toward Daniel with thinly veiled contempt. The widowed janitor stood alone, without representation, a modern David facing Goliath with nothing but determination in his weathered hands. Would you have stood up for him, or joined the crowd looking away? Tell us in the comments. But no one in that courtroom was ready for what happened next. Daniel Matthews had not come unprepared. Behind the shabby clothes and hesitant demeanor was a father with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "Your Honor," Daniel began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in his hands, "I stand before you today not as a legal expert, but as a father who witnessed something that cannot go unchallenged." The whispers continued, but Daniel pressed on, undeterred by the skeptical stares. "3 weeks ago, I helped a lost little girl at Riverside Park. I had no idea that simple act of kindness would lead me here today, facing the man who has tried to destroy my life ever since." The opposing lead attorney, Maxwell Bennington, rose smoothly to his feet. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. My client, Mr. Harrison Caldwell, is a respected businessman and philanthropist. These wild accusations from the maintenance staff at his daughter's school are nothing short of—" "Maintenance staff?" Daniel interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Is that all I am to you? A nameless janitor, not worthy of being addressed directly?" For a moment, something flashed in Daniel's eyes, a glimpse of the man he used to be, before grief and hardship had worn him down. And if stories of fathers who refuse to give up move you, subscribe now. More powerful stories every week. Daniel Matthews hadn't always been a school janitor living paycheck to paycheck. 5 years earlier, he had been Daniel Matthews, Ph.D., professor of literature at the State University, with a beautiful home in the suburbs, a wife who painted landscapes that hung in local galleries, and a daughter who inherited both her father's intelligence and her mother's creativity. Life had been good until the night a drunk driver took his wife Sarah away forever, leaving Daniel to raise 8-year-old Emily alone. The medical bills had come first, from Sarah's 3 days in intensive care before she succumbed to her injuries. Then the mortgage payments became impossible on a single income. Daniel took a leave of absence to care for Emily, who had withdrawn into herself after her mother's death, refusing to speak for months. By the time Emily began to emerge from her grief, Daniel's academic position had been filled, the university offering only vague promises of future openings. One by one, the pieces of their former life were sold off. Sarah's paintings the last to go, Daniel unable to bear looking at them, but equally unable to part with them until the threat of eviction left him no choice. They moved to a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, and Daniel took the first job he could find, janitor at Lakeside Academy, a prestigious private school that offered a substantial discount to employees' children. Emily deserves a good education, he had told himself on his first day, swallowing his pride as he mopped the same hallways where he had once hoped his daughter might walk as a scholarship student. Now he cleaned those halls after hours while Emily did homework in the maintenance office, both of them invisible to the wealthy families whose children attended the academy. Until 3 weeks ago, when Daniel had taken Emily to Riverside Park after his Saturday morning shift. He had been saving for months to buy her a new bicycle, nothing fancy, just a second-hand model he'd found online and fixed up himself. Emily had been riding along the path, her face lit with the first genuine smile he'd seen in months, when she suddenly stopped. "Dad, I think that girl is lost," she said, pointing toward a small figure sitting alone on a bench, wiping tears from her cheeks. Daniel approached carefully, aware that a single man approaching a child might appear suspicious. "Hi there, are you okay?" he asked gently, keeping a respectful distance. "My daughter noticed you might need some help." The little girl, no more than 6 or 7, looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I can't find my daddy," she whispered. "He was on a call, and I saw the ducks, and now I don't know where he is." "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Charlotte," the girl sniffled. "That's a pretty name," Daniel said. "I'm Mr. Matthews, and this is my daughter Emily. We'll help you find your dad, okay? Can you tell us what he looks like?" "He's tall," Charlotte said, which made Daniel smile. All adults were tall to children. "And he wears a suit, even on weekends. And he has a silver watch that makes a funny noise every hour." Daniel nodded, taking out his phone. "Do you know his phone number?" When Charlotte shook her head, he asked, "What about your mom's number?" The girl's lower lip trembled. "Mommy lives in heaven now." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, and he saw Emily flinch slightly beside him. "I understand," he said softly. "My wife, Emily's mom, lives there too." Something shifted in Charlotte's expression, a moment of recognition, of shared experience that transcended the difference in their ages. She reached out and took Daniel's hand without hesitation. For the next hour, they walked the park methodically, Emily wheeling her bike alongside them while Daniel carried Charlotte on his shoulders so she could see above the crowds. They checked the playground, the duck pond, the concession stands, and were heading toward the park security office when a commotion erupted ahead of them. A tall man in an expensive suit was surrounded by park security and what appeared to be private security personnel, his voice carrying across the distance. "I don't care what protocols you have. Find my daughter now, or I'll have all your jobs by morning." "Daddy!" Charlotte called out, waving frantically from atop Daniel's shoulders. The man whirled around, his face transforming from rage to relief in an instant. "Charlotte!" He rushed forward as Daniel carefully lifted the girl down, setting her on her feet just as her father reached them. Charlotte threw herself into her father's arms, and he clutched her tightly, eyes closed in silent gratitude. When he finally opened his eyes, he focused on Daniel with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "You found her?" "Actually, my daughter noticed her first," Daniel explained, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Charlotte was very brave. We were just walking the park looking for you." The man, Harrison Caldwell, though Daniel didn't know his name yet, straightened up, keeping one hand firmly on Charlotte's shoulder. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a wallet. "I'm extremely grateful. Please let me." Daniel raised his hand, shaking his head. "No need for that, sir. We're just glad Charlotte is back with her dad safely." He smiled down at the little girl. "Remember what we talked about while we were walking? About how sometimes it helps to stay in one spot if you're lost?" Charlotte nodded seriously. "And to find a mommy with kids or a person in uniform." "That's right," Daniel said, then looked back at her father. "She's a smart kid." Something unreadable flickered across the man's face. "Yes, she is." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "Harrison Caldwell." "Daniel Matthews," he replied, shaking the offered hand. "And this is my daughter, Emily." Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Matthews, you work at Lakeside Academy, don't you? Maintenance department?" Daniel blinked in surprise. "Yes, I do. How did I?" "Charlotte attends Lakeside. I'm on the board of trustees." He looked Daniel up and down, taking in his faded jeans and worn jacket. "Interesting." Before Daniel could respond, Caldwell's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. "I need to take this. Thank you again for your assistance with my daughter." He turned away abruptly, answering the call as he guided Charlotte toward a black SUV where a driver stood waiting. Emily watched them go, her expression troubled. "Dad, he didn't even ask if Charlotte was okay." Daniel squeezed her shoulder. "Some people have different ways of showing they care, Em." But he had noticed the same thing, along with the calculating look in Caldwell's eyes when he'd realized who Daniel was. Something about the encounter left him uneasy, but he pushed the feeling aside. "Come on, let's get some ice cream before we head home." Little did he know that this chance encounter would upend his life completely. Would you have accepted money for helping the lost child, or refused like Daniel did? Let us know in the comments. 3 days later, Daniel was called to the principal's office at Lakeside Academy. Principal Winters, a woman who had barely acknowledged his existence in the 2 years he'd worked there, sat behind her desk with an unusually grave expression. "Mr. Matthews, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news. We've received a complaint about you from a parent." Daniel frowned. "A complaint? I don't understand. I rarely interact with the students or parents. This concerns an incident at Riverside Park this past weekend," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "It's been alleged that you approached a student outside of school grounds in an inappropriate manner." The blood drained from Daniel's face as he realized what was happening. "You mean Charlotte Caldwell? I helped her when she was lost in the park. My daughter was with me the entire time." Principal Winters shuffled papers on her desk. "Mr. Caldwell has significant concerns about the nature of your interaction with his daughter. He's requested that we conduct a full investigation, and in the meantime," she paused, still not looking directly at him, "in the meantime, we'll need to place you on administrative leave." "Administrative leave?" Daniel echoed incredulously. "For helping a lost child find her father?" "Mr. Caldwell's account differs significantly from yours," the principal said. "As a trustee and major donor to Lakeside, we must take his concerns seriously." "What about my account?" Daniel demanded, rising from his chair. "What about the fact that Emily and I spent an hour helping Charlotte when she was clearly distressed? Does that count for nothing?" Principal Winters finally met his gaze, and there was genuine regret in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel. My hands are tied. You'll continue to receive pay during the investigation, but you cannot come onto school grounds until this matter is resolved." Daniel stood frozen, the implications hitting him one by one. No access to school grounds meant Emily couldn't attend classes either. What about my daughter, Emily's education? "I've been authorized to inform you that, under the circumstances, it would be best if you made alternative arrangements for Emily's schooling, at least temporarily." The injustice of it struck him like a physical blow. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "You know it's wrong." The principal didn't answer, which was answer enough. That evening, Daniel sat at their small kitchen table, head in his hands, as Emily worked on her homework. He hadn't told her yet, couldn't bring himself to destroy another piece of her world, not when Lakeside had become her one source of stability after losing her mother and their former life. His phone chimed with an email notification, another rejection for a teaching position he'd applied for weeks ago. He was about to put the phone down when a text message appeared from an unknown number. "Mr. Matthews, Harrison Caldwell, I believe we have matters to discuss. Come to my office tomorrow, 10 a.m. Caldwell Tower, 30th floor." Daniel stared at the message, anger and confusion warring within him. This man had just cost him his job and his daughter's school placement, and now expected Daniel to come to him like a summoned servant? He almost typed a scathing reply, but stopped himself. Maybe this was an opportunity to clear up the misunderstanding. For Emily's sake, he had to try. The next morning, after dropping Emily at a neighbor's apartment with a vague explanation about a job interview, Daniel stood in the gleaming lobby of Caldwell Tower, feeling conspicuously out of place in his one good shirt and the tie he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. The security guard eyed him suspiciously, but directed him to a private elevator after confirming his name was on the visitor list. The elevator opened directly into a vast office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Harrison Caldwell stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he gazed out at the view. "Mr. Matthews," he said, without turning around. "Punctual. That's good." Daniel remained by the elevator. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Caldwell, about the false accusations you made against me, perhaps?" Now Caldwell turned, his expression unreadable. "Please, sit down." He gestured to a seating area with leather furniture that probably cost more than Daniel's annual salary. "I prefer to stand." Caldwell shrugged. "As you wish." He walked to his desk and pressed a button. "No calls, Patricia." Then he faced Daniel directly. "I've been looking into you, Mr. Matthews. Quite the fall from grace, isn't it? From tenured professor to school janitor in just a few years." Daniel's jaw tightened. "If you invited me here to mock me—" "Not at all," Caldwell interrupted smoothly. "I'm merely establishing context. You see, when a man in your position suddenly takes an interest in my daughter, I find it prudent to investigate." "Takes an interest?" Daniel repeated incredulously. "I helped a lost child. Any decent human being would have done the same." "Perhaps." Caldwell leaned against his desk. "But not every decent human being has your particular history, Professor Matthews. Or should I say, former professor." "What are you talking about?" Caldwell picked up a folder from his desk and opened it. "5 years ago, you were involved in a wrongful death lawsuit against Edward Harrington, CEO of Harrington Pharmaceuticals, after your wife's accident. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence." Daniel felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. Edward Harrington had been the drunk driver who killed Sarah, but his team of lawyers had managed to suppress the blood alcohol test results on a technicality. The case had never even made it to trial. "What does that have to do with anything?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. Caldwell closed the folder. "Edward Harrington is my former brother-in-law, Charlotte's uncle, my late wife's brother." The room seemed to tilt sideways as the connection became clear. Daniel gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "You think I targeted your daughter deliberately? As some kind of revenge?" "The thought crossed my mind," Caldwell admitted. "It seemed too coincidental, you working at her school, then happening to find her alone in the park." Daniel shook his head, disgust rising within him. "I didn't even know who she was until you showed up, and I certainly had no idea of her connection to Harrington." He straightened up, finding his voice again. "But now that I do know, I have to wonder why you're really doing this. Is ruining my life some kind of preemptive strike? Finishing what your brother-in-law started?" Something flashed in Caldwell's eyes. Not anger, but something more complex. "That's not why I called you here." "Then why did you get me suspended? Why threaten my daughter's education?" Caldwell walked back to the window, silent for a long moment. "Because I needed to confirm my suspicions. I needed to see what you would do when pushed to the wall." He turned back to face Daniel. "And now I need your help." Daniel let out a disbelieving laugh. "My help? After what you've done?" "Yes." For the first time, Caldwell's carefully controlled facade cracked slightly. "Because someone is trying to take Charlotte away from me, and I believe you're the only person who can help me stop them." The courtroom fell silent as Daniel recounted his conversation with Harrison Caldwell that day in the penthouse office. Even the team of attorneys across the aisle had stopped their whispering, all eyes fixed on the janitor in his worn blazer. "Mr. Caldwell told me that his former brother-in-law, Edward Harrington, had filed for custody of Charlotte," Daniel continued, addressing the judge directly. "He claimed that Harrington had fabricated evidence suggesting Caldwell was an unfit parent, the same man who had evaded justice for killing my wife through legal manipulation was now trying to use the courts to take Charlotte away from her father." Daniel opened his faded portfolio, removing a series of documents. "Mr. Caldwell offered me a deal. If I would help him fight Harrington, if I would testify about Charlotte's behavior the day I found her, confirm that she was well cared for and clearly loved her father, he would reinstate me at Lakeside, create a full scholarship for Emily, and provide a generous settlement for my family's pain and suffering." The lead attorney for Caldwell rose to his feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Mr. Matthews is clearly attempting to extort my client with these fabricated claims." "I refused his offer," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the objection. "I told him I wouldn't be bought, and I wouldn't lie, not even against the man responsible for my wife's death. The truth was that when I found Charlotte, she was frightened and alone because her father was too busy with business calls to notice she had wandered off. The truth was that she didn't run to him with joy when we found him. She ran to him with relief tinged with fear of his reaction. Daniel placed another document on the evidence table. After I refused, Mr. Caldwell became desperate. He offered more money. When that didn't work, he threatened to ensure I'd never work in education again. And when that failed, he resorted to this. He held up a final paper, a restraining order application with his name on it. He attempted to file this restraining order, claiming I was stalking his daughter, with falsified evidence including manipulated security footage from Lakeside Academy. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Matthews, these are very serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. After our meeting, I suspected Mr. Caldwell might take extreme measures. I recorded our entire conversation on my phone. He placed a small digital recorder on the table. I've provided a copy to the court along with verification of its authenticity from an independent expert." The lead attorney for Caldwell surged to his feet. "Your Honor, any such recording would be inadmissible. California is a two-party consent state for recordings." "Except," Daniel interrupted, "when one party has reasonable belief that the recording will capture evidence of a crime or fraud. Given Mr. Caldwell's attempt to bribe me and his threats, this exception clearly applies." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge gavelled for silence, staring down at Daniel with newfound respect. "Mr. Matthews, you seem unusually well-versed in evidentiary law for a school janitor." Daniel straightened his shoulders. "Before I lost everything, Your Honor, I was a tenured professor with a law degree I never practiced. Life can take unexpected turns, but education is something no one can take from you, not even the Harrison Caldwells and Edward Harringtons of the world." The judge nodded slowly. "We will take a 30-minute recess to review this new evidence. Court is adjourned until then." As she rose, she paused, looking directly at Daniel. "Mr. Matthews, I recommend you wait in my chambers during the recess. Bailiff, please escort him." As Daniel followed the bailiff toward the judge's chambers, he caught sight of Emily sitting in the back row of the courtroom, her eyes shining with pride. Beside her sat Charlotte Caldwell, who had insisted on being present despite her father's objections, her small hand raised in a tiny wave. Would you have had the courage to stand up to a powerful man like Caldwell, even knowing the risks? Share your thoughts in the comments. The judge's decision came swiftly and decisively. Harrison Caldwell's attempt to silence Daniel had backfired spectacularly, and the evidence Daniel provided became the cornerstone of a much larger investigation into both Caldwell and Harrington's legal manipulations over the years. But the true resolution came 3 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon at Riverside Park. Daniel sat on a bench, watching as Emily and Charlotte raced their bicycles along the path, their laughter carrying on the breeze. So much had changed since that fateful day in the courtroom. Caldwell had lost everything: his company, his reputation, his freedom. The investigation had uncovered years of corporate fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. Edward Harrington, too, had finally faced consequences for Sarah's death. The evidence Daniel had painstakingly gathered over 5 years finally seeing the light of day once Caldwell's legal wall of protection crumbled. But amid the justice and vindication, there had been one unexpected outcome that troubled Daniel deeply. Charlotte had been placed in foster care while the courts determined her long-term guardianship. The little girl who had already lost her mother now faced losing her father as well, regardless of his crimes. "It's not right," Daniel had told his lawyer. "She's already lost so much." Which was how, against all odds and conventional wisdom, Daniel Matthews, widowed school janitor with a law degree and a heart too big for his own good, had applied for emergency foster placement of Charlotte Caldwell. The courts had been skeptical at first. What connection did he have to the child? Why would he want to help the daughter of a man who had tried to destroy him? But Emily had written a passionate letter to the judge, explaining how she and Charlotte had bonded over their shared experience of losing mothers, and how Charlotte needed stability, not another disruption. And so, temporary custody had been granted, with strict oversight and regular home visits. Daniel had returned to Lakeside Academy, not as a janitor, but as a teacher, his academic credentials finally recognized again. Both girls attended the school, their unlikely friendship a source of constant amazement to those who knew their story. Now, watching them race their bikes through the same park where it had all begun, Daniel felt a presence beside him. He turned to find Harrison Caldwell's sister, Charlotte's Aunt Margaret, settling onto the bench beside him. "They look happy," she said softly, watching the girls. Daniel nodded. "They are. Most days anyway. Charlotte still has nightmares sometimes, and she misses her father, despite everything. We're working through it." Margaret turned to study his profile. "You know, when the courts contacted me about taking custody, I was ready to fight you. I couldn't understand why my niece was living with the man who had testified against her father." She paused. "But then Charlotte called me. Do you know what she said?" Daniel shook his head. "She said, 'Uncle Daniel teaches me that we can choose to be kind even when life isn't kind to us.' That's when I knew she was exactly where she needed to be." Daniel swallowed hard against the emotion rising in his throat. "The permanent custody hearing is next month." "I know," Margaret said. "I've withdrawn my petition. I'll be testifying in support of yours instead." Daniel turned to her, stunned. "But you're her blood relative. The courts favor family placement." Margaret smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Family isn't always blood, Daniel. Sometimes it's the people who pick you up when you're at your lowest and show you a better way forward." She looked out at the girls again. Besides, Charlotte needs her sister. As the sun began to set over Riverside Park, casting long shadows across the path where two girls who had once been strangers now raced as sisters, Daniel Matthews understood a truth he had been fighting since the day he helped a lost little girl. Sometimes the greatest acts of justice aren't won in courtrooms, but in quiet moments of compassion that change lives forever. "They're calling for us, Uncle Daniel," shouted, waving from the path where she and Emily had stopped their bikes. "Come on, race you to the duck pond." Daniel stood, offering his hand to Margaret. "Shall we?" Together, they walked toward the girls, toward a future none of them could have imagined just months before. A future built not on revenge or bitterness, but on the simple, world-changing power of choosing kindness in the face of cruelty. Never judge a man by his appearance, for behind worn clothes may beat the strongest heart. And never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness. It might just change not only one life, but many. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more powerful stories every week. And click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so powerful you'll never forget it.